Welcome! If you are interested in learning about transition criteria to evaluate and guide a transition in the area of human resource management, you found the right video. In this video, you will learn about general transition criteria useful for judging whether an upcoming transition is likely to be successful or not. Hello and welcome. My name is Jan Laser. I'm involved in organization and personnel management research, which includes the topic of this video, transitions. So let's jump straight in. This video is divided into three parts. First, I will present general transition criteria I have selected. Then I will place these criteria in relation to their valence. Don't worry, I'll also explain valence when we get to it. Finally, conclusions will be discussed. Here I present the attributes that Ashford listed as transition attributes in his work Role Transitions in Organizational Life, an identity-based perspective. Each criterion is cast as a continuum. For instance, in low magnitude versus high magnitude, magnitude refers to the degree of role contrast, for example, leaving one company to start a similar job in another company, or leaving a company to start a totally different job. The magnitude of the latter would be significantly greater than that of the former. The next three continuums don't need any further explanation. These are socially desirable versus socially undesirable, voluntary versus involuntary, predictable versus unpredictable. But I will elaborate a little on the following: collective versus individual. A collective transition occurs when two or more role occupants exit together. Transitioners see their peers as fellow travelers with the same status and developmental needs, creating an in-the-same-boat consciousness. Anxiety regarding the initial transition can be ameliorated by socially constructing a definition of the situation and their role within it, sharing emergent answers to developmental issues, and seeking and offering emotional support. Long versus short duration of the transition period. The moving out and moving in phases according to Goodman, Schlossberg and Anderson. See my last video for a deeper explanation of the different transition phases. It is said that the longer the duration, the easier the transition. A long period enables one to prepare for an upcoming role, for instance through training or role rehearsals, and fosters a sense of security by providing a grace period in which performance requirements are relaxed. This signals that the organization regards one's development as a relatively long-term investment. Conversely, a short period may make one feel rushed and undervalued. And reversible versus irreversible. A reversible role transition exits when individuals can exit a role and resume their career almost as if they had never entered the role in the first place. The transition can be said to have been reversed if the role and the transition had little or no effect. We can discuss each criterion in relation to the individual's difficulty in managing the transition, and also in terms of the valence each criterion holds for that same individual. Difficulty can be defined as the effort required to become psychologically and physically, if relevant, disengaged from one role and re-engaged in a second role. Valence can be defined as the attractiveness of the role transition to the transitioner. Valence can be simplified to summarize values-based evaluation of the transition, and it exists on a continuum ranging from highly positive to highly negative. A connection can be established between valence and difficulty. The more difficult the transition, the lower the valence is likely to be. and the easier the transition, the higher. If difficulty and valence are now mapped onto the criteria continuums, we can judge to what extent a transition is desired by a transitioner. The more difficult the transition is for that person, the sooner the transition risks becoming derailed. Similarly, the lower the valence, the higher the risk of failure. If we look at the slide, the green area should illustrate that if we are in this area, the transition is usually acceptable to the transitioner. The red area is just the opposite. So, conclusions. The criteria presented here are very general and can be used in a variety of transition scenarios. These criteria can be used to garner an idea as to whether or not a given transition is accepted or desired by a transitioner, which is essential for a successful transition. If we map the evaluation onto the voluntary-involuntary continuum and it tends towards the red area, this would imply resistance to the transition. This can be countered by attempting to convince the transitioner of the necessity and the added value of the transition. Regarding the connection between difficulty and valence, simplistic assumptions have been made that do not always apply in individual cases. So the assertion that the more difficult the transition is for the transitioner, the sooner the transition goes off the tracks, does not always have to be the case. Sometimes the high difficulty of a transition can make it positively valent. For instance, the transition may be approached as a challenge to be mastered. The criteria can also influence each other. For instance, voluntariness versus collectivity. For example, the voluntariness to transition of an individual could be promoted by being carried out as part of a collective. Last but not least, by successfully managing the individual transitions, the change process can be positively influenced. Okay, that's it for this video. In the next video, I will explain how to give feedback. If you want to know more about the differences between transition management and change management or the transition process, please see my previous videos. Goodbye.